those people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do.
So, hack your hackers. So I've been building software for 10 to 12 years. I've building software teams for small companies, big companies, medium companies. So along the way, I've learned a lot of things about what works and what doesn't work, and also the trends in what's going on with the management market, I guess you could say. We're going to start with some theory. So I'm going to go over the history of software development and software. This will probably be the most boring part of the conversation, but let's do it. So in the 1950s and the 1940s, computers were mostly just fancy calculators. They were very direct to hardware. Most programming was done with like punch cards, and the codes were written specifically for the device and for the task being performed. Moving into the 1960s, we started moving away from punch cards and purpose-built software. Most of the computers were isolated to universities and big companies because they were expensive and they were hard to use. The only people who were really interested in computers were academics and tinkerers, people who were passionate about, wow, what's this new technology? I want to play with it. The biggest and probably one of the first big software packages that was built was the Sabre system, which was a booking system for aviation, for booking air tickets. That was in 1962. In 1964, IBM released the System 360, which was IBM's attempt of moving away from the purpose-built computer. So instead of having a room and it's like, okay, we need to build a computer in this room like you would a bathroom, the System 360 was interchangeable. All the parts could be used independently or swapped out. It was standardized. In the same year, in 1964, BASIC, which is a programming language, was also published, released, introduced, whatever you prefer. And it was the beginning of a move away from writing software for the machine. In response to this, I guess, boom in software and software engineering, NATO put together a conference in 1968 to try and work out what was going on. They're like, okay, software's becoming a thing. It's no longer just hardware. How do we do this? What is the best way to approach building the software? What procedures need to be put in place to build stuff? And this was coming back from experience with other disciplines like civil engineering and hardware engineering. They're like, there's no process for software engineering. So by the end of the 1960s, there was an explosion in abstraction. The 1970s was the decade of the information revolution and the growth of software industries. Software was coming out of universities. It wasn't just an academic pursuit. It wasn't just people tinkering with a new technology and developing it. The software languages, the programming languages were becoming a lot more complex and were doing a lot more things. So COBOL, Fortran, scientific languages, finance languages were coming out during that time. But the key language that came in the 1970s was C. And C, the big thing about the C programming language is it allowed the programmer to abstract the program from the hardware, but if they needed to, they could go close to the hardware. So it gave them choice to switch between the two and bridge the gap between the old way of thinking, that is, write the software for the hardware, and the new way of thinking is software and it runs on everything. And in 1977, Apple was incorporated and they released the Apple II in the same year. By the end of the 1970s, C++, which was an improvement on C, was released, published. But it was known as C with classes. It wasn't C++ until later. So by the end of the 1970s, software was well and truly separated from the hardware. You wrote software and you could run it on whatever mainframe you needed to run it on. Comes the 1980s. So Microsoft released their own Unix operating system in 1980, and then later moved to DOS. Halfway through the 80s, 1984, the Software Engineering Institute was created. Now this is a second attempt at trying to formalize software development as a discipline. And so they tried to set standards, expectations, professional conduct, that sort of thing. In 1985, while Microsoft was working with IBM to develop a windowed operating system, they released Windows 1. So this is another step towards abstracting software from the hardware. You know, a user could sit down at a terminal and it's a visual interface. It's like, I can use this, it's like my desk. In 1985, slightly relevant, the video game crash. It's when the software market for video games became so diluted and so destroyed by the cowboys that the industry just fell apart. So by the end of the 80s, and this is an exaggeration, every household had either an Apple II or a Commodore 64. So everyone's got computers in their home. People are building software for fun. It's like, wow, this is a cool toy. This is fun to do. So what happens if you've got hundreds and thousands of people who spent their teenage years making software, making video games, tinkering with computers on their television? You've got very cheap labor, normalization of technology, and an explosion in both the supply and the demand in software. And so in the 90s, it was the boom of technology. All the technology companies were rising to dominance. People were working on computers. It was the rise of the World Wide Web. Everything was happening, fueled by this passion in the 80s by the teenagers. Now they're adults. They can start selling their skills. So because it was all just people doing what they're doing for fun, no one really knew how to build a tech company. You know, they know how to build a construction company, they know how to build a car manufacturing plant, but how do you build a company that builds and sells software? No one knew. So throughout the 90s, there was many attempts to try and work out, one, how to manage a tech company, build a tech company, what's the best way to fund a tech company. And you had all these frameworks and ideas and methodology come out. Like in 91, there was the Rapid Application Development, RAD. And then in 94, you had the Unified Process and Dynamic Systems Development Method. Sorry if I'm using my notes, I can't remember those. The DSDM. In 95, our good friend Scrum. In about 96 is when the World Wide Web really hit. In 96 as well, Crystal Clear and XP, which is extreme programming. And then in 97, feature-driven development. Now, I don't expect you to remember all these, but it's just to give an idea of all the things that were tried and all these concepts that were just bubbling up from this chaos. And of course, by the end of the 90s, it was the beginning of the dot-com bubble. Everyone was investing in tech, excited about tech. It was the latest, greatest thing. It was where you made your money. So there's investment pouring in. Everybody was getting into tech, and I guess it's a gold rush. You know, it's like let's get some of this gold. The thing, I can't remember who said it, but you make more money selling gold pans than panning for gold. Which takes us to the 2000s, the aughts, or whatever you want to call it. In 2001, the Agile Manifesto is published. Now, the Agile Manifesto is a document with 12 points that define more formalizes the way that software was starting to be written. It centers around an agile philosophy that you've got to move quick and be flexible. And the 12 points go over and formalize the ideas. So if you can, check that out, the Agile Manifesto. And it became an umbrella concept for all the management styles that I just mentioned. So XP, RAD, MSDM. In that decade, in the 2000s, the tech bubble burst, and the bottom fell out of this gold mine. Everyone's investing, making money, and efficiency became the game. So you're out of money, you've got all these guys, and you can see all the waste. Because previously you didn't care. It's like, we'll just throw money at them and they'll make software, and we'll all get rich. So what happens if you've got too much money and no idea? You hire consultants. You get people to come in and do it for you. You're like, throw money at it, and hopefully it fixes the problem. The transition from 95 to the middle of well, let's say 2005, things moved away from software being the realm of the tinkerer, being the hobbyist, to serious business. It was becoming a serious way to build a business, to achieve goals. And as a result, you've got all the major tech companies who came out or started building during that period. You know, Facebook, Google. Did have a list of them, but you know what I'm talking about. So that takes us to the 2010 and that decade. This, in 2010, the Kanban method and its ugly twin Scrum were published, or not published, but more formalized. It really became the go-to method to organize software developers. It came out of the pile and was victorious on the top. The most notable example of this is the FBI were trying to replace their filing system, and they commissioned the Sentinel project in 2006, I think. And they wasted a lot of money, a lot of time, and then one of these management consultants came in and said, okay, I can promise you that at the beginning, I'll tell you how much it's going to cost, and after a few weeks, I'll tell you exactly how long it's going to take. And they're like, you're nuts. So they took a risk on him, and it worked. He came in, and the project was completed on the budget he said, and exactly on time. Whoa. Scrum, which is the method he used, became the new messiah. It was like, if you want to build software, you got to use Scrum, because look at the Sentinel project, look at FBI. So in the second generation of software development, it's Scrum or nothing else. So now every software team, at least I've been involved with or worked in or running, have used Scrum. It's what you do. So what is Scrum? I've been talking about it a bit. It's a way to formalize and create a by-the-book approach to Agile. So it takes the ideas of the Agile Manifesto and formalizes it into artifacts, ceremonies, and defines clear roles. It's trying to create structure out of the chaos that was software development. So in Scrum, you take the project or what you need to build, and you break it into what are called user stories. And each one of those user stories is a user-centric case. So let's say, as a user, I want a page that shows my profile details. That would be a story. And so then, once you've broken up the project into stories, you can put those into short iterative cycles. So let's say, instead of saying we're going to build the whole thing, we're just going to build the login page, or just going to build the user page. And so at the end of that cycle, you release that. so the customer can see, oh, there's stuff happening, you're building it, and continue that until hopefully the project is finished. So there's three main roles in a Scrum team. There is the team itself, which comprises of developers, designers, whoever needs to be in the team. You've got the Scrum Master. Their job is to guard the procedure. So make sure that Scrum is being adhered to and to remove any impediments or anything that's slowing the team down. There's also the product owner, and the product owner is the team's proxy for the customer or the business. So it's their responsibility to communicate with the stakeholders and understand the project, the product, everything that needs to be built. Now the Scrum Master and the product owner are adversarial roles, in that the product owner is going to battle for the company, getting as much done as possible, and in whatever way needs to be done. And the Scrum Master is protecting the team. It's making sure that the team can do their work, following the Scrum procedure, and do it as quick as possible. The way they measure this is through velocity. So each story has a series of points or a score, and it's arbitrary. But once you've completed a few stories and you've got those points defined on the complexity or the amount of effort it takes to complete the work, then you can take that number and you can predict future blocks of work. And it's called the velocity. So if 2 weeks passed or 4 weeks passed and you've done 16 points, then you're pretty confident that the next block will take 16 points. So the Scrum Master can watch that number and see what he or she is doing, whether it's improving performance or decreasing performance. To wrap all this up, there is, I think it's 4 ceremonies. Yeah. There's the sprint planning meeting where you, I didn't tell you what a sprint is. The 2-week iterative cycle is a sprint. So the sprint planning meeting is where you sit down and you discuss with the product owner and the team what's going to be built in that cycle. So it's set up beforehand, before it starts. That's the meeting we do that in. Then there's the sprint review meeting, which is during the sprint, you review to see how it's going. You see, are we on track? Is there any problems? There's also the retrospective meeting. After the sprint's finished, you all talk about how you screwed up, what went wrong, how can we do better in the future, what did we do well. And every single day, the final ceremony is the stand-up. Everyone gets together, they huddle, and it's like, okay, this is what we're working on, this is what's happening. Usually, it's structured, what did I do yesterday, what did I do, what am I going to do today, and are there any impediments? So there's this structure, this framework around it. So now you know what Scrum is. It was based off the Toyota production system. So Toyota production system is a method of lean manufacturing that Toyota developed to build cars better, to reduce the waste in both time, resources, and to enable them to scale plants to build more cars quicker. So Scrum is a lazy cherry pick of those ideas, of the methods and the philosophies that Toyota have put down in their production system. Scrum was sold to larger companies by agencies and consulting firms in order to better run their teams, but it really shone in the software houses, the contracting agencies where the customers would come and go. It was a very low trust environment. The client wanted high transparency. They wanted to know exactly what was happening and when it was happening. And also for, I hate to say it, but lower skilled developers, in that you need to build a team quick. Okay, you'll do, put it together, build the product, deliver, forget about it. It was quick, let's get as many get as many jobs as we can, get it out the door. Because most companies, through the fall of the dot-com bubble, they became really nervous about developing inside teams. And so they're like, we'll just defer the risk, we'll get someone else to build it, and if it fails, we don't have to fire them. It's just, yeah, you've done your contract, it's done. And because developers are really bad at dealing with clients and face-to-face interaction, the Scrum framework was a really good way to shortcut the back and forth with clients, with consulting agencies, because you haven't built the relationship, you don't have that rapport. It's just like, here's the process, here's what we want, done. So why not Scrum? In my opinion, Scrum, its basis, the philosophies, are flawed, because it's coming from physical manufacturing. It's coming from the idea that you've got something, now we just need to build it. Like we're building a high-rise, or we're building a car, or... Let's break down to why. I've got a couple of good points that I've noticed that is the major failing points of Scrum. So, violent transparency, in that everything is visible. Daily, people are like, what are you working on? How's it going? What are you working on next? So, if you hit it daily, it doesn't account for the creative ups and downs. It doesn't factor in that some days you have a bad day, other days you have an amazing day. I found when I've been working on projects, sometimes I can have 2 or 3 days where I'm just like, I can't work this out. This is not making any sense. And in the last day or two, I do like a week or 2 weeks worth of work. I just smash it. It comes, it bursts. And so if you're being watched every day, you're going to feel anxious that you're not performing. You're not doing what the rest of the team are doing. And when you're dealing with a creative task, which I'll get to in a sec, it gets in the way. It slows you down. It stops you from being creative because you're more worried about looking productive than actually being productive. Silicon Valley has gotten a lot of things wrong in the last 10 years. But the one thing it did get right is the engineer-driven company. The big companies like, Facebook, Google, the ViaWeb, they're all built by guys who are passionate about software, who wanted to build something. And that management structure has come through, and it's all about the technology, and they're building the technology. The latest trend towards grow fast and cost of acquisition and hyper business focused development, how is this software serving the business, is ignoring the creative process. It's more like, how can this widget make me money? Which, if you go back to the early days of software, it wasn't about that. It was like, this is cool, I'm going to build this. And then the business guys came in and says, okay, this is cool, how can I sell it? And you had the growth and the explosion of technology in the 1990s. Terminal juniority, it's a weird expression. But what I mean by that is the Scrum teams or software teams sort of disintegrate into a team of juniors. The seniors don't really stick around for very long. And this is something I've noticed. There was one team I was in, and we had 3 seniors, and by the time I left, there was no seniors. It was just hemorrhaging seniors. Now, why? Why does it devolve into juniority? Because people who know how to do it don't like to be watched, if that makes any sense. If you've got a plumber and he's been fixing drains for 20 years and you sit there and you're like, you sure you shouldn't make that tighter? Oh, maybe you should look after that leak. He's going to walk out. He's not going to do your job. Also, Scrum focuses on the details too much, and you lose the high level or the architectural view. And seniors are really good at architecture because they've seen the little stuff and they can see how it all fits together. And once you're in Scrum, the architecture's gone. You're just working off user stories. You're working off the minutiae. And R&D, architecture, it's not important. All that matters is building the feature. It's dangerously short term. It's all coming back to just working on the stories. It's about building the features. You know, it doesn't matter if the architecture is good, doesn't matter if it's stable, secure. Can the user see their login page? Can the user see this? It's all about now. Coming back to the grow fast, build your business fast mindset. When it comes to technical debt, and technical debt is when you're building something and you sort of half build it and say, I'll come back to that later. It might work, but it's not robust. And so tech debt is an accumulation of those little compromises. And by the end, you've got this debt you need to pay back. With time, that could be used for building features, but you can use it for the technology and stability. So I sidetracked a bit. So with Scrum and the 2-week sprints, if you have to go back and rebuild something because it's causing bugs and errors, and it's going to take a week or 2 weeks, you're not going to be finishing any stories, and so your velocity is going to go. And even though you're doing something good for the product and something good for the software, because of that number, the velocity goes down. It's like, whoa, you can't do that. You know, you need to do the stories. So it's all about getting the velocity now, getting the points now. Forget about the future. Who cares about reliability? Who cares about stability? And week after week, it's a house of cards, and you just hope you get acquired before you have to fix the mess. And probably the biggest problem is it never ends. Scrum is really good for disaster situations. We've got a problem, we need to fix it. You assemble a team of people who are capable, of experts, and you say, we've got to fix this. And it's just high visibility, go, beat the drum, sprint, run, let's do this, let's get it sorted. Once it's done, problem solved, you fall back and you move into a more sustainable pace. With Scrum as it is at the moment, you've got 2 weeks after 2 weeks after 2 weeks after 2 weeks chasing this goal, and it can go on for years and it doesn't change. There's no break, there's no slowdown to go, okay, what mistakes have we made? Although the sprint retrospective is meant to do that, but that's more looking at what mistakes did we make in the process. And it just keeps on going. And it's a recipe for burnout. And I've seen it, and it happens. It's just constant. It's like there's no end. You don't have a chance to sit back and go, I made something. It's like, okay, what do I need to build now? Now what? So I've told you about where software's come from. I've thoroughly kicked Scrum in the guts. What now? What do you do? Everyone thinks Scrum is the way to go. I'm saying it's not. So how do you do it? I don't know. But what we should be doing is, rather than looking for an off-the-shelf solution to try and fix all the problems, let's look at what's actually happening, how software is being written by these people in their bedrooms, in their garages, these startups with like 2 engineers and caffeine and no money building something. How are they doing it? They're not using Scrum. What is the process? I think that how software management has derailed is that we're placing too much emphasis on software being a process, in that it's just, you're building something, you're manufacturing something, go make that car. In my experience and the way I approach software development, it's more like writing a book. It's more like a novel, in that, sure, you've got plot elements. You've got the main character, you've got a story arc, you've got a problem here that the characters need to overcome, just like you've got a button, a scroll bar, a logo, all these components. But the real creativity of the writer comes in how you combine those components in a creative way to solve the problem. And things like Scrum, they ignore that influx, that back and forth, that sitting down in silence and going, yes, of course, that's the idea. So ask the developers, ask the engineers, how can I help you do your work better? Because they're there because they love it. They're there because they're passionate about it. If you've hired the right people, then they'll beg you to make what you want them to make, if that makes any sense. Which comes to the last section, is what can you do? Like I've set you up, I've shattered your dreams. Now, what can you take away if you're starting to build your own team or you're within a team to manage a group of creatives better? Hire the right people. So there's two types, well, in my experience, there's two types of developers. There is the hackers, the guys who love technology, the guys who are passionate about it. It's all they've thought about since they were a teenager. The second one, the career programmers, the career developers, the guys who are like, there's money in software, I'll go to uni and I'll learn that. If you've got no money and you've got no time, then the best way to get things built quickly is to find the hackers, is to find the guys who are like, wow, that's a really exciting project, I'm going to build that. And the act of building itself is payment alone. Once you've got the right guys and you've given them a tasty objective, you've given them a cool project or something that's interesting, and don't mistake a cool project for something that's exciting and interesting like AI. Like some of the most exciting things I've built were just plain Jane versions of similar things. I just could take it and build it in a novel way behind the scenes. So give them your business idea and then get out of the way. Go, okay, build it. Here's your constraints, have fun. There's nothing worse than when you're trying to create, let's say make a painting or write a book or build software. And there's someone constantly coming in and going, oh, what's this? Why did you choose that color for the ground? Or why is the sun over there? Because when you're painting, you put the sun there, you cover it, you put the sun there, you cover it, you put the sun there, you cover it, until you get the final painting. Software's the same. The process is sometimes very different from the end result. So if you get out of the way, give them the what, they'll look after the how, and they'll love it. Create an environment that is good for creativity. I couldn't find a reference to the paper, I'm sorry, but there was a few studies done 6 or 7 years ago that explored the difference between music and silence when it comes to creativity. And the classic view is the programmer, he's got headphones on, he's listening to music, he's punching away code. And I found that the music is really good for getting into a state of flow. It's really good for focusing on something once you know what needs to be built. Once you get into the process work, it's put in the music, you shut down, you focus. But coming up with creative ideas, if you've got a problem and you don't know how to solve it, silence is the best way, because it allows the noise of the mind to take over and you come up with things that you wouldn't normally come up with. And so if you can create an environment that is quiet, clear of distractions, no back traffic, so you don't alert the monkey brain, it's like, oh, there's a threat behind me. In that environment, you're more likely to get the creative ideas that save you money in the long term. You know, the eureka moments. Respect the downtime. So there's a big misconception that when you're not typing, when a programmer is not writing code, he's not productive. He's not working. It's not true. The actual writing of code, the process of putting it from the mind into the text editor is such a small part of software development. Most of the time it's trying to think of how to make things fit together. It's thinking of the best way to structure things, how to format the data. All this stuff is intellectual and creative. So if you're distracting yourself by typing, these ideas aren't going to come. So you need to give them space and time to sit back and not do anything. So for example, like you're in the shower and the idea just hits you. You're like, it's genius. It could be anything. It's the same with when building software or doing something creative. It's when you stop doing and distract yourself that the gems come. And those gems are more valuable than 10 hours just randomly trying code until it works. So if you see your dev on Facebook or watching a YouTube video, just stop for a minute and go, he's thinking. Of course, if you're uncomfortable and you're like, hey man, you're watching YouTube all day, what am I paying you for? Comes to the last and probably the most important thing when you're managing a team of creatives. You've got to trust them, and they've got to trust you. So work on the trust between you two. So going back to the YouTube example, they're spending all day watching YouTube. It should be comfortable enough for you to be honest with them and say, look, I feel that you're taking advantage of me, and that not be taken as a hostility. Create those lines of communication. Drop down the barriers of oh, he's my boss, I've got to look busy. There's nothing more corrosive than someone who's just trying to look busy, because then you as a manager, you don't know they're not productive, and it shows that they're afraid of you. And fear or the feeling of obligation kills creativity. And sure, they look busy, but they're not making anything useful. They're not doing good work. So none of this works unless you've got the trust, unless you've built the trust with you and between you and your team. So that's about it. Sorry if I raced through a bit. I went a bit over time. But if you've got any questions, you want to drill into anything in particular I have gone over, then now's the time.
I wanted to ask Stefan, when you discussed people leaving dev teams under a Scrum context, seniors, where do they go?
They usually start their own stuff. They try and build a startup, or more likely, they become contractors. So they just sell themselves to corporations for $1,000 a day and just build whatever needs to be built. Because in that way, they're given the what, and because they're a contractor, they're free to do the how. They're like, I know what you want, I'll build it, done. And I've thought about it myself, and I've done it myself. Like, I left a big team to build Snappr, build a startup, because I wanted to be left alone, because I knew what needed to be built, I knew what needed to be done, just let me do it. And so I came on as the tech lead for Snappr. And the other guy that I knew that left the team, he did a similar thing, and he started contracting. So that's usually what happens to them.
And okay, so what would you do if there was kind of infighting within your team, within your development team?
By the time that's come about, it's a bit too late. Infighting in the team usually happens when there is a breakdown in communication and trust. And I've seen it develop from some of the most innocuous of things. It's someone says something, the other guy gets upset, and then they bring that personal mismatch into the professional. This guy says, oh, we should use this technology, and because the other guy's holding resentment, then he's like, no, we shouldn't use that. And it just creates the friction. And if there was enough trust in the group, whether between the leader and the team or between the team themselves, then at the point of that first disruption, he could pull them aside and go, hey man, that wasn't very nice. You shouldn't have said that. But unless you trust the person and you feel safe, you're not going to do that. So to actually answer your question, because it's too late isn't a good answer, pull back and try and create those lines of communication. So if you can see that the team itself is breaking apart, no one's talking to each other, no one gets along, then start building that link between you and the individual members. Start having one-on-ones every week, just to clear the air. And it's not like a formal a performance review, it's like just two mates sitting down. We can talk about whatever you want. You know, who do you want to bitch about? Let's complain about guys in the office, and build that trust and that dialogue between you and the team member. And if you can do that with enough of the team members, you can use that trust and put it onto the two guys and say, look, you guys are obviously having a problem. Let's work it out. And because you're the shared trust, they're more willing to talk to each other openly and resolve whatever issues need to be resolved. That's how I'd approach it, but it really depends on the people and the problems being solved.
All right. Well, thank you, Stefan. Guys, we've got coffees on the table. Feel free to hang around, have a chat. You know, have some more breakfast if you need, and obviously you need to ask Stefan anything. He's always willing to help out.
Did my slides break?
They did.
Why didn't anyone tell me?
They were just like title slides though.
Man, I had some pictures of you in here. It was great. So many jokes. That's annoying.
At its core,